Fleet Commander stood before the War Council of the Dominion with absolute confidence in his voice. The holographic display showed a small blue planet rotating slowly in the darkness of space. Earth, home to a species that had only recently discovered faster than light travel. The humans were new to the galactic stage, and in its mind, they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The solution is simple, announced to the assembled admirals and generals. We do not need to waste resources fighting them directly. We simply remove them from the planets they have colonized, force them back to there. Without their colonies, their expansion stops. Their threat ends. The Dominion had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of species. Their intelligence network stretched across countless star systems. Every decision they made was based on careful analysis and data, and their data on humans told them one simple truth. Humans were soft creatures from a temperate world. They required specific conditions to survive. Take away those conditions and they would die. Admiral leaned forward with interest. You propose environmental warfare. Exactly, replied. He manipulated the display to show 3 human colony worlds. These colonies represent the bulk of human expansion outside their home system. Nexus Prime, 7, and Horizon's Edge. Our intelligence indicates that humans have spent enormous resources making these worlds habitable. Terraforming stations, atmosphere processors, temperature regulators. They have built entire artificial ecosystems just to survive. He zoomed in on each world. We destroy their infrastructure, not the humans themselves, just the machines that keep them alive. Without their technology, these worlds become hostile. The humans will be forced to evacuate or die. Either way, we win without firing a single shot at their populations. The Galactic Council cannot accuse us of genocide. We simply remove the artificial conditions that allowed them to exist where they should not. The War Council approved the plan unanimously. It was elegant. It was efficient. It was based on thousands of data points collected over years of observation. The Intelligence Division had studied human biology, their settlements, their dependency on technology. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Humans could not survive without their machines. What the Dominion did not understand was that their intelligence was catastrophically flawed. They had observed humans in their comfortable colonies. They had watched humans living in climate-controlled buildings and traveling in temperature-regulated vehicles. They had seen a species that seemed completely dependent on technology for survival, but they had never looked at human history. They had never studied what humans could endure when they had no other choice. The attack came without warning. Dominion warships appeared above all 3 colony worlds simultaneously. They did not engage the small human defense forces. They simply bypassed them and struck at the infrastructure. Power stations exploded. Atmosphere processors were reduced to burning wreckage. Water purification plants collapsed into rubble. Within 6 hours, all 3 worlds had been stripped of the technology that made them livable. On Nexus Prime, temperatures began dropping immediately. The planet orbited far from its star. Without the heating systems, the surface temperature would fall to minus 60 degrees within days. The Dominion observers watched from orbit, expecting to see panic, expecting to see desperate evacuation attempts, expecting to see humans dying by the thousands. Instead, they saw something that made no sense to them. Governor Sarah stood in the ruins of the capital city and addressed the surviving colonists. 200,000 humans had been spread across the planet. Now they were gathering together, not in fear, but with grim determination. Sarah had grown up hearing stories from her grandmother about surviving harsh winters in northern China with nothing but wool blankets and body heat. Her grandfather had crossed frozen mountains on foot to escape a war zone. These stories were not unique. Every human present had ancestors who had survived the unsurvivable. "We know what to do," Sarah announced. "Our ancestors survived ice ages without any technology at all. They crossed frozen continents. They built shelters from snow and kept themselves alive through winters that lasted years. We have more resources than they ever did. We have knowledge they did not possess. We will not leave our home. The humans began adapting within hours. They stripped insulation from destroyed buildings and fashioned it into clothing. They dug into the ground where residual heat remained. They discovered that the local ice caves maintained a constant temperature just above freezing. They learned which alien plants could be eaten and which could be burned for fuel. They huddled together for warmth in ways that the Dominion's individualistic culture could never understand. On 7, the situation was different but equally dire. The planet had always required atmosphere processors because the natural air was thin and filled with toxic compounds. Without the processors, humans should have suffocated within days. The Dominion calculated the oxygen depletion rate with precision. They knew exactly when the last human would gasp their final breath. But humans had lived at extreme altitudes on Earth for thousands of years. Tibetan populations had genetic adaptations for low oxygen environments. Andean peoples had developed physiological changes over generations, and all humans possessed a remarkable ability that the Dominion had completely overlooked. They could acclimatize. Their bodies could adjust to conditions that should have killed them. Colony Director was a former mountaineer who had climbed the highest peaks on 3 different worlds. He knew that the human body was not a fixed thing. It was adaptable. It could change. He organized the colonists into groups and moved them to the highest elevations where the toxic compounds were less concentrated. He implemented breathing techniques that maximized oxygen absorption. He had them exercise in ways that increased their red blood cell production. People suffered, people struggled, some died, but most survived. Their bodies adjusted. Their lungs grew more efficient. Their blood carried oxygen more effectively. Within weeks, they were living in conditions that the Dominion had calculated as 100% fatal. Horizon's Edge presented the greatest challenge. The planet was covered in harsh radiation from its unstable star. The protective shielding had been the most critical infrastructure. Without it, the surface should have become a death zone. The Dominion expected this colony to fall first and fastest. They did not account for a simple fact. Humans had evolved under a sun that bombarded them with radiation every single day. Their skin could darken to protect them. Their cells had repair mechanisms that could fix radiation damage. And when those mechanisms were not enough, humans simply went underground. The colonists on Horizon's Edge retreated into cave systems and mining tunnels. They lived like their ancient ancestors had lived, in darkness beneath the earth. They developed schedules that minimized surface exposure. They created rotating shifts so that no individual accumulated too much radiation. They used every piece of surviving technology to monitor exposure levels and treat those who received too much. Doctor became the leader of the survival effort. Her family had survived the atomic bombing of a Japanese city generations ago. She carried in her blood the legacy of ancestors who had endured radiation sickness and still lived to have children. She knew that humans were not fragile flowers that wilted at the first sign of danger. Humans were survivors. Humans were adapters. Humans were the descendants of every creature that had refused to die for billions of years. Months passed. The Dominion waited for the collapse that never came. Their observers sent back reports that were met with disbelief. The humans on Nexus Prime had established permanent underground settlements that stayed warm through geothermal heat. The humans on 7 had developed a functioning society at altitude levels that should have been uninhabitable. The humans on Horizon's Edge had built an entire civilization beneath the surface. Not only were the humans surviving, they were thriving. They were innovating. They were creating new technologies from salvaged parts. They were finding ways to grow food in impossible conditions. They were having children. They were building schools and hospitals and community centers. They were refusing to leave. Fleet Commander received the reports with growing horror. His elegant plan had failed completely. The humans had not evacuated. They had not died. They had simply adapted. And now something worse was happening. News of the colony's survival was spreading across human space. It was becoming a rallying cry. It was transforming human society in ways that the Dominion had never anticipated. The story of the three colonies became legendary among humans everywhere. It reminded them of who they were. It connected them to their ancestors who had crossed deserts and oceans and frozen wastelands. It awakened something primal in the human spirit. The comfortable colonists who had lived in climate-controlled buildings suddenly remembered that they were the children of survivors. They were the descendants of people who had refused to die no matter what the universe threw at them. Human military recruitment tripled within months. Scientists and engineers dedicated themselves to creating technologies that would never again leave humans dependent on fragile infrastructure. Politicians who had advocated for peaceful coexistence with the Dominion were replaced by leaders who demanded strength and independence. The attack that was supposed to weaken humanity had instead united them in ways that nothing else could have accomplished. The Dominion's intelligence failure was complete and catastrophic. They had gathered data. They had analyzed patterns. They had made calculations based on observable behavior. But they had never understood what humans truly were. They saw humans as a young species dependent on technology. They did not see the millions of years of evolution that had shaped human bodies and minds for survival. They did not see the countless generations of ancestors who had survived ice ages and famines and plagues and wars. They did not see the fundamental truth that made humans different from every other species the Dominion had encountered. Humans did not survive because conditions allowed them to survive. Humans survived because they refused to die. They adapted. They endured. They found a way, always, no matter what. 5 years after the attack on the colonies, the Dominion faced a human civilization that was stronger, more unified, and more determined than ever before. The three colony worlds had become symbols of human resilience. Their populations had grown. Their technologies had advanced. Their people had become living proof that humanity could thrive anywhere in the universe. Fleet Commander stood before the War Council once again, but this time there was no confidence in his voice. The holographic display showed human warships massing at the border, ships built by people who had learned they could survive anything, crewed by humans who had lost their fear of hostile environments, led by commanders who understood that their greatest weapon was not technology but the indomitable human spirit. The Dominion had made a terrible mistake. They had tried to use the universe against humanity. They had failed to realize that humanity had been fighting the universe since the beginning of their existence, and humanity had been winning that fight for millions of years. The war that followed would reshape the galaxy forever, but that is a story for another time. What matters is the lesson that the Dominion learned too late. Never underestimate a species that survived its own planet. Never assume that creatures who tamed fire and crossed oceans and walked on moons will surrender to mere hostile conditions. Never forget that humans are not defined by where they can live comfortably. Humans are defined by what they are willing to endure. And humans will endure anything.